Okay, so this class, I'm Baron Andreas, Rædesmann Andreas. I've been in Pelican for about a year, and I have been helping to run the mid-realm university e-rum for longer than that, since the pandemic began back in March of 2020, or since the SCA shut down, I guess, in March of 2020. And so the mid-realm was one of the first kingdoms to really engage in online activities officially at the university level. And so we have the longest running online university program. We're certainly not the most sophisticated. We haven't had the most classes, but we've absolutely been running things hard for a long time. And we started off with somewhere between 7 and 9 classes a week for the first 2 months, and then we pulled back to about 4 classes a week after that. And then the 4 class a week sessions ended at the end of March, I think, and we're going to have, there's one virtual collegium on the window for in our window for June. There's a Tri-Kingdom University that we're doing, which with Atlantia and Meridies, I think, or maybe Aethelmark Meridies, I'm not sure. And then there's, in theory, planning for a rum in October, and that may or may not be in person depending on how the event runs. But so this class is based off of my experiences as being a facilitator and a moderator and a teacher in the virtual space for over a year for the SCA, and for longer than that in my professional life. My professional life, I'm a project manager and a portfolio lead, but I'm also a coach and a facilitator and a moderator. So I've got experience doing this in a professional context as well. So teaching online is very different from teaching in person. And I don't think anybody would feel like that's a controversial statement to make. And then teaching in the SCA or any sort of voluntary activity as well is very different from, like, if you enrolled in like University of Phoenix, right? Isn't it University of Phoenix that does the online, all those online classes? That's different, because when you enroll in the University of Phoenix, you're getting a, theoretically at least, legitimate vetted degree at the end of it, right? So you're getting an actual thing you put in your resume, and B, you're paying for it. So you are already incented to go. When it's virtual schools for my kids, if they don't show up, they get in trouble, right? And they get in trouble with the school, and they get in trouble with their parents because the teachers will contact the parents. And the SCA teaching is different. It's different in person, but when you're at an event in person, somebody has traveled there to be there, and so the assumption is that they want to be in the class. But for virtual stuff, it's really easy to click on that link and then sort of zone out the entire time. I'm the first person to tell you, I've done it myself. Oh, this is a really interesting class. I get into the class and maybe something pops up on my work email that I need to take care of, or one of the dogs is having a problem, right? Or the kids, or I'm just not feeling it. It's not as engaging as I thought. The class isn't good, or somebody interrupts, and it's easy for me to click on my camera and turn it off and mute my microphone and turn it off and not pay attention. So the trick is to try and figure out how to be an engaging teacher so that you can get them to be interested in you, because arguably you're teaching something because you want to, because you think it's interesting, and you want the people who come to your class to think that it's interesting too, and not be turned off by it. So you want to be engaging to help them understand what you're trying to teach, and get into the right mindset to try and absorb that information over Zoom. So there are things that work over Zoom and things that don't work over Zoom. If your camera is turned on, I can see your face. I can read some of your body language. I can hear, if your microphone is on, I can hear some of the tone in your voice. I can understand your word choice, but I don't get everything, all of the feedback that one gets out of an in-person interaction, right? When you're with somebody in a room, it is easier to engage with them because you just can see more of them and you're able to focus on people more easily, and it's just easier to do. So you need to, as a Zoom teacher, and I'm sure Aggie can speak to this a lot, I'm sure Aislena can speak to this a lot, is being able to learn how to read the body language and the way people are paying attention to you in the class is incredibly important, probably more important than it is in person. And so you need to give people a reason to stay, and you need to be able to read what they are doing for their engagement. Hello. And that way you can understand, how to get what you want, to be able to give them that information. So, the way the RUM does it, or the way the RUM did it, is we did Zoom sessions and then we did some Facebook Live. Facebook Live, I think, is even harder because Facebook Live, there's no verbal or visual interaction. It's all chat. So you're on the screen teaching your thing, and it's being live streamed. And maybe it's just a video of you that's being live streamed, and you're not even there to engage. And so that's not really teaching in the same sense that I think that most of us would consider RUM classes to be teaching. So one way that I try to gain interaction is and I'll tell you this right now. Anybody can ask a question at any time. If you have a question, raise your hand on camera, raise your hand using the raise hand function, unmute your microphone and interrupt me. It is totally okay for any of that stuff to happen with me. Everybody, every teacher is different and they all have their own comfort levels, and hopefully they'll tell you that at the beginning of the class, like I'm telling you now. But if you have a question that you want to ask or a comment, you think that there's something that I'm saying that's maybe you don't understand, or you have a different point of view, I want you to raise your hand. I want to hear what you have to say, because that's what I'm interested in. I'm learning too. As a teacher, these are learning experiences for me. I'm learning how to teach it better, right? And so that's important to me too. So you want to give people the opportunity to interrupt and raise their hands and have any questions. So I'm actually going to interrupt myself right now and say, hey, Hillary, Aislena, you're teachers for your professional life. There might be other teachers on the class. Yalmer, you're in school to become a teacher. What sorts of things are you doing right now where you're teaching? Maybe you're teaching hybrid, maybe you're teaching virtually. Certainly we were teaching virtually before. I know my school, my kids stay home, but there are kids who go to school. So how is it going for you? What are things that you've been focusing on?
Our school's a little bit different because our kids are so tech savvy already. It's a magnet program. So, and they're pretty self-motivated. So we don't have to do the, please answer the please. But I found that early on, when I say, hey, I'm trying to what I was talking about the other day, like, could everybody list one of the Varnas of India's caste system, of India's early caste system when the Aryans took over? And I want everybody, I'm like, everybody in the class, put it in the chat. So instead of doing extended response questions, I'll mix the extended response up with a question that everyone can answer. That way I can see engagement, as well as like kind of check to see that everybody's kind of still with me. And doing that interspersed with asking one person, that's right. Helped a lot. Like that's gone a long way to really help throughout the year.
Okay. I can say in our school, we also use exit tickets a lot. So at middle school, our classes are either kids are in a hybrid, or there's some that are still totally remote. But in a lot of the younger grades, it's mixed. I know 3rd, 4th, 5th, there's some kids that are in person and some kids that are participating remotely in the same class. So that makes it way more challenging for my teachers. But besides the fact that they're calling on them, there's also then what we call an exit ticket, where they need to, in order to get their participation points for that day, they need to answer some sort of a question. And it's one of those questions, it's not a right or wrong answer. So it's not like, 2 + 2 = what's this kind of thing, but it's more like a a philosophical question. And if it at least looks like they've put thought into it, they get the participation points.
Cool. So, and I'll open it up to everybody else. I mean, people have taken, if you've taken virtual classes, you know, what are some things that teachers have done to engage, to help you feel engaged that I haven't mentioned? Go ahead, unmute yourself and just speak. You don't need to, I'm not going to call on people necessarily.
I just don't want to like talk over other people. I want us to shout out Hjalmar. I can't say your name. Shout out Hjalmar and Evelyn did an amazing job of like doing these camera shots so you could see like what they were like really close up what they were doing. And that was fantastic because I've also taken classes where you can't see what people are doing and you're like, I'm not sure if I can repeat that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a minute too, actually, as well. Does anybody have another one that they've seen that they really like? Another way of engaging?
I am not taught, but I use 2 cameras when I work, so I can switch between people seeing me and people seeing what I'm doing. And I think that's a really helpful thing, especially if I do end up teaching a class on craft or something. I want people to be able to see my hands, but they can hear my voice. And that helps to, you know, to make them see what's going on. And then we can, you know, I can't necessarily look at their hands. They might have to shift their camera around a bit for me to see what their hands are doing, but it would be at least something.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay. All right. We just talked about multiple cameras and devices. So we've seen that work in a couple of different places. There's a lady down in Sternfeld, which is Indianapolis, I think she's in, where she does, she did a series of calligraphy illumination classes. She won a week, actually, for like 8 weeks. It was really cool. And she had her laptop set up on like a little shelf so you could see her face. And then she had a camera that was on a rig. It was clamped somehow to a thing pointing straight down, so you could see the work that she was doing as she was scribing. And we made that shot. That camera was the big picture, and then we put her face in that on her laptop. We put that in a sort of like a picture-in-picture kind of mode, and we made that so that people could then talk to her. And the trick with that particular class was, one thing to worry about is that, you know, when you initially set everything up, your microphones are all on, your cameras are all on. So if you've got 2 devices in the same space and you don't mute one and turn the volume down, you're going to get a ton of feedback. So the easy way to fix that is, if you're in Zoom, if you look at your mute button, there's a little up arrow next to it. If you click on that, you can leave computer audio. And that way the system will keep the camera on, but it won't process any audio data whatsoever. So you don't have to worry about muting. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just don't join via audio. And then that way it's just using your camera. So it's like using it as a monitor. So that's one way to do things. And you can plug in multiple, if you're working off of a desktop and you don't want to use your phone or something like that, you can plug multiple cameras into your computer to do that. You just need to keep track of what's what, right? So find a way to, you know, it's a little bit different when you do it that way in Zoom, because I don't know. I would actually have to look at it. I'm not sure how much Zoom can handle multiple video inputs from one person. But there's ways to make it work. You can switch back from one camera to another. When you use in Zoom, if you're using multiple cameras on the same computer, you would select one of those cameras and you would just manually switch back and forth between them rather than doing some kind of picture-in-picture. And there are other tools that you can use that will allow you to do that sort of thing. Like you could bring up a video editor that lets you do a picture-in-picture and sort of run that, and then use Zoom to share your screen. And then if you have the interface for the tool that's doing your picture-in-picture video, then Zoom's going to show, you know, your big picture and your little picture, and that way you're using both cameras at the same time. So, you know, that's all stuff that everybody, you know, if you're interested in pursuing that, you want to go explore it, something you would want to look at on your own. You know, I'm always happy to help people with technical things, and I'm generally pretty good at looking at something and figuring it out if I don't know what it is. So, so we talk about engagement a little bit. Ask people for questions, ask them questions, and ask them. I mean, the idea about asking for questions to be answered yes, no in the chat, or a simple example in the chat is great. But also, if you're having a class and you definitely feel like you're not getting a lot of people aren't really sort of grabbing on to what you're doing, ask a question that's not a yes, no question. Because if you ask a yes, no question, right? Like if you say, have you been in a class where somebody's used this? Yes. And then there's nothing, and there's silence, and you're like, okay, like we've all had that class, right? We've all taught that class where we've been in there, and whether it's virtual or not virtual, whoever's there, and I know this happens to professional teachers far more because I did it to my teachers all the time. You answer the question with the minimal amount of language as possible, and you can tell the teacher's really frustrated because they are trying to draw you out and to get you to do more, and you don't feel like doing it that way, and it's our job as teachers to try and help you get that out there. Another way of doing this is, and this isn't so much that you do like in a class necessarily, but it's something that you can do as part of your post-class sort of review if you ask for that, or it's something that you can do as a just a general sort of question. Ask people how they like to be engaged. Hey, I want to teach a class about this. These are some of the things I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? Right? Go ask people who you trust. Go ask people who you like. Go ask people who have taken your classes before. Hey, how did that class go? Did you like that class? How did it work out? Right? I taught a class for the North Shield Symposium and the North Shield Service Symposium last week. That was last week, right, Hillary? And I had 4 or 5 people in the class, and there was some real engagement there. But then I sent some follow-up emails and got no feedback at all. And so now, I'm going to be teaching the class again for the Tri-Kingdom Symposium, and I already have some ideas about what I want to do. I actually taught the class as a test class ahead of time for a couple of people, and it went okay. But the class itself, I got some feedback from my pre-class. I got a little bit of feedback during the class when I was teaching it, but I got nothing back afterwards, nothing. And so, it makes me a little apprehensive about teaching the class again. I want to move it from being a 3-hour class to a 4-hour class, or a 2-hour class, 2-hour class, 3-hour class, something. 2-hour class to a 4-hour class. I want to do 2 2-hour classes instead of 1 2-hour class because we ran out of time. So we couldn't do the exercises, and so we skipped them because I asked the class what they wanted to do, and they asked to skip them so we could move on with stuff, right? But it didn't feel great, right? And so clearly I need to work on that particular class material. And I have a bunch of reasons why it wasn't, I can think of a zillion reasons why it didn't go as well as I wanted it to, but it didn't. And so if I want to teach this class and be good at it and have it be a good class, I need to fix the problems with it. And so I will probably be teaching it as reworking it and then doing another test run with some friends again, and hopefully I'll be able to get some better feedback. One of the things that I like to try to do is have activities or exercises during the class. That can simply be opening it up for like a little bit of a roundtable for 5 or 10 minutes. And a lot of that depends on how long your class is. If I'm teaching, when I teach leadership class, and I teach a couple of different leadership classes, but when I teach leadership classes, I'll stop and I'll say, let's talk about this thing. Let's talk about this thing for 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And I want to point out, 5 minutes doesn't feel like a long time, a lot of to people, but it really is a long time. To talk for an hour is endless. I don't like talking for an hour. I don't like to do lecture classes. I like to do classes where I'm getting information back from people. So like I did before with Hillary and Selena, I will stop and say, hey, let's try this. Let's talk about this thing for a couple of minutes. So we're gonna do that here in a minute. So I'm gonna bring up one more thing, but break up the talking. Don't have it be you just droning on and on and on for an hour. Okay. Now there are topics where that is sort of the way you need to do it, right? You're presenting a class on something and it's very research oriented and you're the subject matter expert, or it's very much a 101 style class where people will have questions, but they may not be ready to participate in specific activities. You got to sort of shape your class and the way you're teaching it to the material, but it's helpful to to not go more than 5 to 7 minutes, I think, without trying to seek some kind of feedback or engagement from people. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to talk about something. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask for feedback from people. So PowerPoint. PowerPoint is the most abused software package on the planet. It's not designed to get across every single thing that you want to say about something. PowerPoint is designed to be a summary or a prompt for the teacher and the students so that they can associate concepts with further explanation that is done verbally in the class. And as students, you are expected to take notes, right? It is not meant to be a data dump. Now, in my leadership class, there are some slides that I have that are full of text, but I don't read every single word because I give out the handout at the end of the class, right? So I'll give it to everybody, but I don't give them the document until the class is over because I don't want them reading the document because that's not everything that I'm going to cover. And I'm not going to talk about everything that's written down. Some of this stuff is just links, right? And some of it is do further investigation on this thing, go look it up, because people learn in multiple ways. And so if I talk about something and then I say, so if you want to learn more, go read this book or go read this article, then you'll go and do that. And now maybe the way that you learn when you read something is going to bond with the way that you learn this thing when I talk about it, and it will help your understanding better, right? So I want to hear PowerPoint horror stories. So anybody who wants to talk about this, go ahead and unmute, right? Turn on your camera if you want to. Talk about a class or this happens at work all the time. Do you work?
I teach sixth graders. Too many. So many horror stories.
Let's go. Let's hear it.
Because they don't want to take notes. They want you to give them everything. At least our middle schoolers do that. Like, you want us to write something down? What are you talking about?
So let's talk about. Go ahead, Aggie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just mine are too verbose, and they do want to put every single thing that they get excited about their topic, so they want to put everything on there. 12 billion quotes, and pulling them back is really hard.
Hi everyone. My apologies for being late.
Oh no, you're good. All good.
Majda Anwar from Barony South Downs. Yeah, I have a phrase we use at work, which is called death by PowerPoint. And yeah, I saw a deck the other day that was 80 slides long for a 30-minute presentation, and I went, oh no.
How many pages?
80.
Oh my gosh.
80, and I literally had to stop everything, and I'm like, okay guys, I'll be back tomorrow because I have to redo this presentation so we don't lose a client. And we redid it, and we got it shortened a lot, but it's become a crutch. I feel it's become such a crutch.
Yeah.
And it becomes a crutch not only for the presenter but also for the presenters, because they can be like, oh, I can just see it later, and it's like, you can, or you can be in the moment as well.
Yeah, if I see a PowerPoint presentation and it's got more than, and again, everything is shaped to fit the class. So I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but there are moments where, like, if I've been in a class already, if I've been in the class for 20 minutes and it's clearly not a great class, and they click next and you see, a page of text,
right,
I check out. At that point, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to read this later anyway, because there's no way I'm going to absorb it now. 80 pages in 30 minutes, that's 2.7 pages per minute. How is that even, was it single bullet points per page?
I mean, I think some of it was supposed to be like an appendix for later, and I'm like, it doesn't matter, because even if you presented 30 slides in 30 minutes, they're not going to get the concept. So, we had a little, excuse my Southern expression, come to Jesus about that one, because it was,
Oh my gosh,
it was a little bit of a.
Can someone teach this to the Illinois State Board of Education for their training videos? Holy
Well,
I'll stop.
Michelle,
There's someone who talks about this at length. It's Edward Tufte. He's a professor emeritus at Yale. I happen to have one of his books handy here.
check that out.
I can't
Ooh.
remember which one it is in the books, but in one of his books, he gives the example of what he calls the worst PowerPoint presentation ever. So it talks about the Gettysburg Address. You know, we all know it starts out 7 years ago. First bullet point, 87 years ago. And then they said bullet pointing, you know, a new nation conceived in liberty. And then bullet point, new nation. You know, he just tears it to shreds with this PowerPoint. So yeah, if you ever get a chance to find some of his books, I'll put the author's name in the chat.
I have got to look at I want to borrow your book.
Seriously, he has a class. I was fortunate enough my company paid for me to go there. His whole thing is about presentation of data and things like that.
Cool.
And by the way, at the class, one of the cool perks was he was a collector of rare books for many years. He showed off a first edition copy of Galileo, one of the major mathematical treatises. And one of the things he showed in there when they're talking about mathematics is there are pages where they have glued like pieces of paper or parchment into there that you could fold up and make cubes. So he's all into data presentation. And by the way, because of that, pop-up books are period.
I just got really excited. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I just linked both. I linked the quantitative information book in the chat, and I also sent a link to the Nancy Duarte Slideology book, which I didn't get a chance to look at. Can you talk about that book a little bit, Nadja?
Yes, yeah. So Slideology, so Nancy Duarte I think she kind of like got her claim to fame by helping with some of Steve Jobs' presentations and that whole sort of concept of visuals. But in her book, she kind of talks about how to take this very corporate languagey now, but like storytelling and how to take visuals and like how to have like a text heavy slide and turn it into a visual that makes sense. And so it's a really good like base concept. It helped me a lot. I feel like a lot of times PowerPoint is what I live in, day out. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
And it's important to remember, right, that most people who teach in the SCA aren't teachers. Like, I mean, they're teachers because they're teaching, but they're not teachers in that they have not been, they don't understand pedagogy, they don't understand methodology, they don't understand. They're just getting up there to talk about it. They're really talkers. They get up to talk about a thing that they love. And maybe they can show you how to do the thing, like if it's a physical thing, right? Like I teach a lot of poetry classes, and I am not, there's a reason why I'm a pelican and not a laurel, right? I am not into research of the nature that is required to achieve laurelhood in this kingdom. That's a level of research that I am simply unwilling to put myself through. I just don't enjoy it, right? So I don't have an advanced degree. I don't have a master's degree because I am not interested in pursuing that kind of additional work. And that's personal for me. I'm not saying that it's bad or anything like that. But I'm a how-to kind of guy. I don't care so much about the historical reasons for why poetry forms were made the way they were. I care about learning how to do them. And there's lots of people out there in the SCA who are like that. They like to learn how to do stuff, and they like to teach how to do stuff. But not everybody's good at teaching. Not everybody's engaging. Not everybody, some people, their class could have been an email, or it could have been a list of instructions, right? Or maybe what they need to do is, instead of teaching a lecture class, is bring their lathe to an event and do a workshop. We're going to make a goblet in our class, in our lathe class. Here you go. Come on, let's do it. Right. And that's the way to do it instead. So it's great to sort of think about things in those terms as well. Teaching doesn't have to be standing up at the front of the room in front of a whiteboard and talking, reading off of your PowerPoint or your notes or whatever, right?
That's such a great point. That's a really,
right.
It just made me think about like 5,000 things. So thank you. That was really good.
Great. That's fantastic. Does anybody have anything else? Annette, I'm not sure if you've been trying to ask a question or not. You're still muted. There you go.
Okay. I'm wondering about how to present a class that is strictly visually based, no text. I've had 2 attempts. The first one was more frustrating than I would have expected, but and the second, we got an in-swine camera to put on the desktop, and it works to swivel the head to do my face, and then you position it the other way and I can go through books, or eventually it can scan my books to make slides. But again, these are visuals. One was on extant textiles, images I had downloaded from museums, extant silks. The other was 14th to 16th century sources for continental European illumination. So it's focused starting on Bohemia and Germany, going up to Belgium for the Burgundian, and then France. And that was more successful, but it took a bit of jiggering, almost 5 minutes, to get the technology to work for me. And now I'm hearing that you don't want to present a lot of information. The textiles is more eye training to understand what a period looking brocade would have looked like. Sure. It covers like 6th, 7th century up through the end of period, and actually slightly post period, because a lot of what ends up in 15th and 16th century clothing is actually 17th and 18th. So this lets people understand the whole context by visual, and the slides are named with the technical data from the different museums. So I'm kind of at a loss as to how to present this when it's just a picture, no text. So if you've got any tips, I would love to hear.
So let's talk about that for a second then. I mean, obviously, you cannot control how people are looking at your content, right? So maybe they're looking at it on a phone, which means that they're probably not really able to see much of what you're displaying on the PowerPoint anyway, okay? Like I've been in meetings for work where I've been driving somewhere to get to a doctor's appointment, and somebody will say, so let's go and look at the document. And I'm like, that's a Word document that's 20 pages long. I can't see that on the phone. First of all, I'm driving. Second of all, it's on the phone, right? Even if my wife is driving, I'm still not gonna be reading your document. So you're gonna need to verbally talk about things for me. So when you say, so you're talking 2 classes, one that was about fabric and one that was about illumination?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so, and you were teaching it live because you wanted to be able to answer questions, or?
Yes, because I didn't know of any other way, actually.
Sure. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind for me, and I want to be very clear, if anybody's got an idea about this, please, first of all, speak up, because I am not any kind of media expert when it comes to this sort of thing. I just have ideas, and I don't want you to feel like I'm telling you what to do, okay? These are suggestions, and if you don't like them, then don't do them. It might be easier for you to record your clips of different pieces of illumination or fabric, depending on which class you're teaching, and do a little voiceover for that clip. And then instead of trying to manage all of the different cameras and the fabric and or the items that you're trying to show, and remember what to say at the same time, you pre-record all of that stuff. And then in the class, you share the recording and you play the recording, and it's a couple of minutes long. And then you ask about if there are any questions. And that way you're still there live to be engaged with the people who are interested in this stuff, but you've got the content already done. So you don't have to think about managing that at the same time, right? And that way, if you don't like how one presentation goes, you just re-record it, right? So you can take a video of the, like, and I mean, this requires a certain amount of technical acumen, although I'd be happy to help you if you want. You'll want to video whatever it is that you're looking at, right? Or pictures.
Mhm.
And then you'll want to record your voiceover, and then you need to edit that together. And I mean, I can do that. The tools that I use to do that, one of them is free. The other one costs $40. And it generates the data. You know, I know how to do it. Reach out to me afterwards. I'll put my email in the chat. Although we're Facebook friends, you can just ping me.
Okay.
You know, and I'm happy to talk to you about how to get that done. But that's one way that I might talk about doing that. What's another way that what's another way, I'm going to open up for the class. What's another way that we can help Aneta do a class where she's trying to talk about either pictures of illumination or kinds of fabric where she needs to be able to show that stuff, but also keep like control of the class at the same time. Anybody have any ideas?
I have one idea, but I don't know if it's pertinent to your period or the extents you're trying to show. But I don't know if there's like particular patterning that you're trying to highlight. I know sometimes for extents, you know, obviously they're not in the best condition, so it's hard to see patterns, or it's hard to see, you know, what you're trying to look for. So if you have images, you know, could you highlight on top of them and then use that in a slide? So then that way, when they're looking at the extent, and on top of it, you're drawing whatever triangle or whatever animal shape. And then you have that, so then the people can see exactly what you're looking at. Like I know for like a lot of Eastern patterns, you know, there's a big difference between like paisleys. People think paisleys are period, and there's a very big difference in like tulips and paisleys and like different types of fabric patterns. And we talk about that a lot on the SCA Persia and SCA Ottoman list and SCA India groups. So that's the first thing that came to mind, but I guess it depends on what you're trying to showcase.
Mine, I will only present in color, very visually distinct images. If it's something really muddy or black and white, I generally have not added them to the slideshow that I use to present. I have a master list of about 700 images with probably about close to 100 bookmarks of additional images to flesh out late 16th century and earlier period. But what I have done is put it in clumps, and this may work to break it into distinct sections where it's like pre-1000 and much of it's roundel patterns, but you see figures in them as well as animals. Human figures on chariots, for instance. My focus is on Spain, Italy, and Byzantine and Ottoman production. The silks that were from East, I have a few of them, but I have only just gotten a couple books on Chinese textiles, which is kind of really have to be a different focus completely, a different class. In fact, I've been thinking of splitting the Spanish, which was Muslim production, from the Italian. There is a little bit of French, and I have a number of German silk images, because that is a stylistic difference that's very dramatic. Animal figures in the Italian and geometrics in the German. And it's there are some extant textiles that came from China that ended up in German church treasuries. So, you know, there's all these cross-continental aspects to it, but I was just at first doing the class to do eye training. So somebody could go, oh, that looks like a good approximation of an early 14th century textile. It doesn't have roundels anymore, but it's still got the facing at birds. So that'll work. And that sort of thing. So people can say, hey, this will be excellent and worth the expense. And so I could probably break it by the stylistic differences. So pre-1000 or 1100, then 1213 to like late 13th century, 12th and 13th century. And then the 14th century almost deserves 2 hours all by itself. And 15th century is mostly pomegranate pattern, and 16th century starts with that. And by the end of it, you're getting really small derivative motifs like little S's all by themselves that were extracted from part of the framing element on the pomegranate. So, there's this transition, as you can see, it's kind of complicated. And it wasn't to take in text or concepts per se. It was more of a visual aid so people would know what to expect if they were drawn to brocades over, say, solid color linen or wool or silk. And I think there's room for both, or for all. And everybody likes shiny, and not everyone can afford Sartor. So this was my desire to help. And I've been studying this for as long as I've been in the SCA, and this year marks 30 years. So it's
Sure.
one of my passions, and I don't know if everybody else would get passionate about it, and I don't want to overwhelm.
Well,
thoughts?
I mean, again, keep in mind that people, especially when it's online, but in the SCA in general, people are going to go to the classes that they want to go to. I mean, there's no overt incentive. It's not like you're going to get an award for going to classes. It's not like you're going to get a job by attending an SCA. I mean, it's unlikely anyway, that you're going to get a job by attending an SCA class. You're not getting any certifications. There's no incentive on top of either I want to support my friend or I want to learn about this thing. So people are going to attend the class that they are interested in, even if they're interested on I'm just starting out thinking about this thing, so I want to take an introductory class. So think about the ways that you can shape the information that you're talking about, right? You could do a 101 class where you cover do a general overview of 600 to 1600 if you wanted to. And then you can teach additional, more in-depth classes about specific things, right? So you teach the 101 class, which is the overview, and then you say, hey, I also have these 200 and 300 level classes about specific textiles from specific regions and specific time periods. Those are also X number of hours long. Please feel free to come to those classes as well. And we've all had the class where we go and teach, and we might drive 6 hours to go to a RUM and nobody shows up because nobody shows up. That's the glory of virtual teaching. I can run a poetry symposium. If I ran a poetry symposium in the mid-realm, I would be lucky to have 4 or 5 people be there. I can run a poetry symposium online and I'll get 50 people because anybody can attend from all over the SCA, right? 50 might be a little much, but I'll get enough people that'll be worthwhile to schedule a bunch of classes for it, 4 or 5 classes, right? It isn't going to be a massive event like a RUM would be, or an Atlantean RUM. I don't know if anybody's attended anything in Atlantean, but they are really organized on top of their stuff. But because of the virtual world and our ability to make things available globally now, teaching something online in the SCA opens up an entirely larger audience to your stuff, because as much as I have friends in Atlantia and the East and North Shield and Drachenwald who would love to come to a poetry class, they're not going to fly to Aurora, Illinois to take a class. It's unlikely anyway that they're going to do that for a single day event, right? But I can teach something online and schedule it so that it's available for everybody, and they'll take the class and they'll be happy about it. So I wouldn't worry about, I think you probably definitely want to think about doing a 101 kind of overview thing so that people know sort of the basics before they dive in deep, but then make your classes and teach them. And if people show up, great. And if not, record them and stick them up on your YouTube channel. And that way people that's the other thing that we can do is people can learn what we call asynchronously, right? Right now, this is a synchronous class, basically. I'm talking or we're talking and we're all listening at the same time. I'm teaching, your students, you're here, but we're recording the class and we're going to put it up on the Irritan YouTube channel in, whenever we get the editing done. And then in the future, somebody can take this class again. And if they have a question, they can comment in the YouTube channel and the admins for the YouTube channel will get notified that there's a question, and they can track down the teacher or whatever and say, hey, we have this question about this thing. What do you think? Right? So there's all sorts of things that open up. So I've only got about 12 minutes left before, 2 minutes left before it's supposed to be done, 12 minutes left before the class is over. So there is like a whole second section here that I want to sort of, I don't want to blow through it necessarily, but I'm gonna touch on a bunch of different things. So a couple of things to think about before you actually run one of these classes, an internet class, especially on Zoom. It's different for Facebook or YouTube because there are no real versions for Facebook or YouTube, but for Zoom, it matters. Make sure that your Zoom is up to date because there are new features being introduced every day. The automatic closed captioning didn't exist for Zoom 3 months ago, and now it's here. And it's, if anybody wants to try it, if you hover over your Zoom bar at the bottom, there's a CC button that says closed caption. You click on that and you can click show subtitle, and it will start to show subtitles, and it's something that's available for everybody. And it works about as well as you would expect an automatic AI subtitling tool to work, which means not very well, but it also gives you it gives the person who's recording it a transcript. And because of the transcript, I can then go and use that transcript and edit it and fix the words that are wrong and then put that in the YouTube link or link to it on the YouTube page, right? So make sure your Zoom is up to date. Make sure all of your tools work, especially if you're going to have multiple cameras and you're switching back and forth. Make sure that your microphone is hooked up properly. Make sure that your cameras work. Make sure your internet is functional. If anybody was paying attention earlier in the day, when we were working with the moderators in the morning, one of our moderators was on her phone because her computer had decided to do a bunch of updates all at once. Well, you can go and tell your computer the day before, if it's Windows. I think you can do the same thing for Macintoshes. Go tell your computer to do all the updates the day before. Now, maybe you'll have no choice, and Microsoft will put out an urgent update the morning of your class that you have no choice but to install and reboot, and it forces it. There's nothing you can do about that, but you can be prepared as much as possible. And yes, you can tell Windows to delay updates. You can tell the Mac to delay the updates. The issue happens is if you delay too long, sometimes the system will simply override what you want if it thinks that it's a critical security flaw that it is going to force you to fix because you're potentially causing a gap that is going to make other people have problems. Make sure that you know your material. Okay, teaching is a kind of performing, especially this kind of teaching. It's kind of performing. Don't just write a lecture, a research paper, and read it. And even if you do decide to write a lecture paper and read it, practice. Know your material. Okay. Now I have a list of notes, which I'm happy to share with people if they want, although it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily helpful for anybody who isn't me because I'm using a little bit of shorthand, but I know the material because I've taught the class before, because I've been doing this for 13, 14 months in the SCA. And also I've been doing it in the rest of my life for longer than that. So I know my material, but if you learn something new that you think is really, really cool, or maybe you're not a great public speaker, you're not good at improvising on the fly, right? I'm also a herald. I do a lot of royal courts. I have to improvise a lot. It's a skill and you build it. But if you don't do those things, practice your material so that you are not in a place where you are going, okay, so now I want to talk about baskets, right? Or whatever. Practice what you're going to do. Start your class early. If you're the host of the class, start early so that students can come in ahead of time if they choose to be. That way they're there. And that way you don't spend a lot of time sort of getting through introductions or talking about stuff. Like everybody has been in those RUM classes where people talk about not the class for 10 minutes because they're having a conversation or whatever. Be prepared, start on time, give people some grace. Don't get me wrong, but start it early. Provide, if you are doing a class that requires people to have material, provide that information in advance as much as you can. If we're going to be working on whittling, then you need to tell people that they should have a knife and a piece of wood, even if you're doing it virtually, okay? Because that's useful and helpful to know. Oh, I need a piece of wood. I didn't know that. Well, it's a whittling class, buddy. But at the same time, maybe it's a lecture class on whittling. Maybe it's a class on the history of whittling. That's not the first thing that I would pick to do, but there might be people out there who are interested in that. So, so tell people what your materials need to be. Plan for technical failure. Have another webcam available to you. If you're going to do teaching a lot, be ready to teach off your phone. I'm not saying run the whole class off your phone, although it is possible to do that. I'm saying be prepared to use your phone to log on to the Zoom, so that you use your phone camera instead of your computer. And then maybe you still have your notes in the computer, and then you have to adapt. What do you do if your computer, if for whatever reason you can't get your webcam to work on your computer? You need to provide the handout via a Google Docs link maybe, or share it off of wherever you've got it hosted. Instead of sharing it visually, you're going to share the link in the chat so people can go click on it and look at it. So plan for technical failure. Plan for what happens when something doesn't work. Try to do that ahead of time. And again, if you're teaching the class through an existing system like the RUM, then the eRUM does all that facilitation for you. But there are lots of kingdoms out there that don't do organized virtual university stuff, so you're teaching on your own. Publicize your class. You're going to share it in the event. You're going to share it with the RUM. But there's other Facebook groups out there like the Honorable Clover, the SC Virtual Classroom. These are Facebook groups that exist to help facilitate virtual classes. It's always good to establish your credentials in the area, because along with everything else, everybody's had that class where somebody comes in and they're the self-proclaimed expert and they want to tell you that you're wrong. And that stinks. Nobody should ever do that. Please don't do that to anybody. If somebody's wrong about something and you know that they're wrong, share it with them privately. Don't call teachers out in the class. But as a teacher, either, be prepared to say, this is what I know. And you can say, I don't know all of this, right? Because maybe you don't know all of this, but I've said that in this class. I don't know everything. I don't know everything about this. I don't know everything about virtual teaching. Again, Atlantia has got their stuff together. They are organized. Their university website blows anything the mid-room has away, right? They're really good at it. I need to go and talk to them about how they do their stuff. But you still know your stuff. You still know what you're doing. It is okay to vary away from your prepared material. We saw that happen today when we talked about, the class for Annette to help her out. It's okay to do that. Don't spend too much time away or you're going to run out of time in your class, like I'm about to. I want to say, I have a note here that says be kind but firm. And I think that means when somebody really wants to pursue a line of questioning, and you need to get back to your material, it is okay to say, I appreciate that you want to talk about this more. I would love to get together with you after class. Please, let's either exchange contact information in the chat, or we're already Facebook friends. I'm going to go and chat me in Facebook, or we can stay on the class afterwards. In this case, each one of these classes has its own breakout room. So everybody else can leave and I can spend time in here talking to somebody if they want. Afterwards, it doesn't impact anybody except the two of us, for example. But if you need to get back to class, say, I really appreciate this question, this line of questioning. I really want to get back to class. Okay. Research your tools, which means know how to use the stuff that you're using. So if you're going to use some kind of new technology, right, learn how it works. There's a technology called Miro that I'm using for my leadership classes that I've chosen to not use for the first time I taught it, because I wasn't prepared. And I decided to just use Google Sheets instead. And then we skipped most of the exercises anyway, so it didn't matter. But Miro is cool. And I was just worried about, Maja knows Miro. I love Miro. I haven't used it very much as an admin yet. It's a way for people to collaborate on things conversationally. And it's very visual. So it looks like a whiteboard with Post-it notes on it, basically. And so you can have material there, you can hide it, and then you can present it, and then you can have people click on the Post-its and type in their own like questions or something. And I've used it a lot as a participant. I just haven't used it as an admin yet, and I just wasn't ready. Google Drive is the great equalizer. Google Drive will open almost any kind of formatted, any kind of document or spreadsheet or presentation that you need. it is less good with video than it is with documentation, with documents or spreadsheets. But you can upload an Excel spreadsheet to Google, and somebody who doesn't have Excel can click on it, and it will preview the spreadsheet for them. And then if you really need to get into it, you can say, open as a Google Sheets document, and it will open for you. It is 98% compatible. So don't do any wacky like macros or anything, but Google Drive will open almost anything. PDFs, Word, it'll open up. What's the old word processing software that wasn't Word? It was
WordPerfect.
WordPerfect. That's right. It'll open almost anything that's not a video or audio. I mean, sometimes it's almost audio. Okay. So Google Drive is the equalizer. So I tend to share all my stuff in Google Drive. It is not as necessarily as secure as Dropbox because it's integrated into your Google identity and everybody's got one. So you can't, it's harder to be anonymous in Google Drive, I guess, a little bit. So you can use Dropbox if you want to. Dropbox does now allow you to view Office stuff, Microsoft Office stuff.
For Dropbox to work, people have to, there's more things you have to download to use it. It's
right, but you can have a separate ID for Dropbox.
But
it's not integrated into your
Google Drive is,
right.
we do Google everything at my school, which is why I didn't talk too much about presenting, because I mean, like, great, I can tell you what to do if you're in kindergarten or first grade. That probably doesn't help you much here.
Right, but my point is that if most of the stuff that we do in the SCA isn't really like privacy related. Like there's no private, for most people, I don't think talk about private health information or private ID information. Dropbox does give you the opportunity to use a different ID to get to it, so you don't have to use your Google ID. That's all. And then one of the things that I like to try to do at the end of my classes, and I'm going to ask you them now, since we're basically at the end of the class. Although if people do want to stay on, it's the lunch period. There's no class until 1:15. There's a lunch break, so we have technically an additional 10 to 15 minutes. So if you want to stay on to talk about hybrid learning, I'd love to do that, but that's completely up to you. My two evaluation, you have asked evaluation questions at the end. What's the one thing that you learned, and what do you still not understand? And that helps me know what's working and what's not, right? And if you want to add more to that, you can. You can put that in the chat. You can send it to my email, which I put into the chat. You can Facebook message me if we're Facebook friends, or even if not, I'll put my Facebook profile in the chat as well, so people can message me. And I live on my computer, and I have 3 or 4 different devices that all pull up Facebook Messenger messages, so I'll see it, I promise. And I respond, unless I'm asleep, I'll usually respond pretty quickly. So feel free to, if you don't feel comfortable saying it here in the chat, you can go ahead and type it. You send it to me in Messenger or email me or whatever. But I would be very much obliged if you would all take a moment to write that down. I don't want to get it verbally because I can't copy paste it if it's verbal, and I have to sort of write it down as you said it. So I'd really appreciate if people would put that somewhere in the chat is the easiest, but again, any one of the other places. And then I want to talk about one of the things I wanted to talk about that's new for this class that I hadn't really talked about in the first class, because I taught the first class in April or May of last year when there was no end in sight, right? Is hybrid classes. So the SCA is talking about returning to in-person events, right? But those in-person events are limited to no more than 150 people. And that is the SCA limit, which means the kingdoms can limit that further. And if your state or your municipality or your venue insists that the limit that it will accept is lower than that, that takes precedence. So you might be able to run an event, but you can only have 75 people. So how would you, as people who are taking this class virtually, like to see things happen for hybrid learning, where some students are virtual and some are in person, but it's all happening at the same time? So that's different from what's happening at, say, my kids' school, where teachers are teaching in person in the morning and then they go home, or they all the kids go home, and then they teach online to the kids who don't come to in-person school in the afternoon, which is what my kids do. So my kids stay home, but some of their classmates go to school. So that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is how would you run a virtual class where the teacher might be virtual, teaching to a bunch of students who are all in the same room, and then potentially teaching students who are there in the same in Zoom with everybody? Or how do you teach where some students are virtual and some are in person, and the teacher is in person as well? Those are the two or three. Those are like the two different contexts for this. What are the sorts of things that you would think would be necessary to do? What would be important?
So I'll go first because I have feelings about this. I teach music and dance in the SCA, and both have minus like some bardic circles where we can exchange and go around. Teaching music, especially to beginners who are timid and shy and want to feel comfortable in learning, is just not even something that I wanted to attempt, because in order for me to hear them, they would have to do it alone on video in front of everybody else. That's unless anyone has any other ideas, I would love that. I personally don't feel comfortable going to in-person events for a little while, but I just it's hard. Like, I would love to hear if there's like hybrid ideas, or if one thing I think would be kind of interesting is maybe being able to do more group musical performance to add a little more magic back in the SCA. Like the CDC is recommending smaller groups of 10 who are vaccinated, and fully vaccinated. I think that would be great. But as far as teaching is concerned, I kind of feel like I have like one hand tied behind my back, because like I have a ton of teaching courses or teaching classes that I've taught for years. And it's just like a new student is going to feel very uncomfortable, I feel, to do this, even if it's like, percussion and forget singing. Like that's not going to happen. That would be a beginner's worst nightmare. I have a hard enough time in person, like helping them feel comfortable enough to try to attempt that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of people who feel very uncomfortable being on video in general, right? Like there are established people, I know established peers in the SCA who I tried to teach class and are like, well, can I be off camera the whole time? Well, you can if you really want to, but I think it's going to be easier if you're not. They were not comfortable being on camera. They didn't want people to be able to see their house. They didn't want people to be able to see them. Just we're not comfortable with it, and that happens. And not everybody can do a virtual background, right? A lot of the virtual backgrounds,
they can't do
powerful enough to do it. You can't do it, and I mean, there's people who are in that position, and you can't, again, we have to show each other grace, right? And be kind and do our best. Everybody's doing their best, hopefully, right? But sometimes your best is to just not, fall into the void and lose to the black dog, right? It's just the best you can do is to just exist, and so you don't do it. And that's your situation is particularly difficult one. There's very, very little sort of teaching like that I think works when it's not one-on-one, right? You could do one-on-one teaching, absolutely, if you get the students to feel comfortable with it, and if you can feel comfortable with it when it's virtual. But it's very hard to do like choral stuff or anything like that. There's one person in Atlanta who's been doing groups of 5 or 6, but she's doing a very specific kind of music where everybody's singing the tone note, the drone, and then they timed when they're supposed to sing their solo while everybody else is singing the one drone note. So it sounds like they're all singing together.
You're not,
but then it's being edited to a point, and there's no real harmonies or changes to that drone.
Like a Gregorian chant sort of thing, or like a church. Okay, and period. Yeah, that's does not work for dance music or cantigas or.
No, totally. Anybody else?
Just a comment that I don't think performing arts works well virtually to mix, to do the hybrid model. So I'm right there with
I
her.
can guarantee it. I'm in a competitive women's barbershop chorus. It's one of my other hobbies because, you know, I don't have enough to fill my time. Well, I do now because there's no time, nowhere to go. But we can't. We are told by our I'm in Sweet Adelines International. I'm in a course in Sweet Adelines International, and we are told no, we can't get together. We cannot get together. Now there is some talk that if we can find a big enough parking lot, that we might be able to socially distance enough to maybe have a gathering or two over the summer. But yes, especially singing and playing any kind of wind instrument, whether it be brass or woodwind instrument, are the two worst things in terms of spreading any kind of disease, but certainly coronavirus. And so, yeah, and there is no online forum for that where we can all do it together. We just can't, because people's speeds are different. People, there's lag times. Like on Zoom, only one person can talk at a time. Same thing pretty much with Google. And so we listen to learning tracks and we all mute ourselves and we're singing alone in our house. And that's not what any of us signed up for, but that's the only thing we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's just nothing good for that right now.
One thing with hybrid classes, I picked this up from a course a couple of weeks ago out of North Shield. If you have hybrid, you have to be able to get both groups of students involved in the same thing. For example, let's make pretend somebody over here just asked me a question. There's nobody there, but we'll pretend. No, only if the penguin is green. Okay, to you that meant absolutely nothing on screen. The people in the area might have heard the question, can I make a penguin on my device if it has a white background if I make it yellow? It's like, no, only if it's green. So what you have to do is you have to say, well, the question from the audience is, and repeat the question.
Right.
Or you have another person as a facilitator and they're saying this question was asked, or they read off of chat. So everybody has to hear both the question and the answer. You can't just focus to one group or the other. I see that a lot in meetings when we have large, corporate-wide meetings. You'll have somebody fielding all the questions, and that one person is then presenting them to the speaker.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that way you can repeat it's always good to repeat the question. If any in-person class, it's always good to repeat the question because maybe you're not even close enough. Like if it's there's a lot of people there, right? Who knows? And we've only got a couple minutes left, right? Next class starts in 3 minutes, and I don't want to keep people here any longer. But if you've got a big enough hall and somebody stands up and asks a question up at the front, repeat the question so the people in the back of the hall can hear it anyway, right? But especially if you're doing a virtual hybrid, some kind of hybrid thing, and somebody asks a question, and the same thing works in the opposite direction. If somebody in the Zoom asks the question in the chat and the teacher sees the question and doesn't repeat it for the rest of the class who may not be in Zoom, then you want to repeat the question before you answer that question too, right? I've got a series of ERUM YouTubes where the chat's not visible when you record it. Okay, so people were asking their questions in the chat, and I've got a host of YouTube videos that we really sort of had to figure out how we were going to upload them to make sense, so that they could make sense, because the teacher would read the question and then answer it verbally, but they wouldn't read the question out loud. So it sounds like they're having a conversation with somebody you cannot hear, which doesn't help, right? So, all right. So there's only a couple minutes left before the next class. So thank you, everybody. I'm happy for, again, anybody who wants to send me an email or a Facebook chat about the 2 questions, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, thank you very much.